Hey Kong fans, welcome to the finale of this run of the King Kong reviews. We've had a lot of fun, laughs, and adventure all the way through. And to close off this run, we're going to take a look at an attraction that used to be right here in Revenge of the Mummy. It frightened guests for over 10 years with its sheer size and banana-scented breath. It's the stuff of nightmares, until our sympathy gets the best of us in the end. You could call this a Kongfrontation. As we walk along the streets of a very realistic backlot of New York, guests entered the attraction through an exterior building recreating Pennsylvania Station. Within the 6-story walls of a massive soundstage, guests would find themselves in an elaborate production set simulating a New York subway station, Manhattan's Roosevelt Island tram station to be exact. Overhead, television monitors displayed a special WWOR TV news report entitled Kong on the Loose, anchored by real-life newscaster Ronald Smith. The giant ape King Kong has escaped its confines and was wreaking havoc in the streets of New York. Interesting fact, they used stock footage from the 1976 King Kong to portray the beast's rampage in the newscasts. The guest line makes its way up a long ramp and ends at the elevated Manhattan station of the Roosevelt Island Tramway. Upon arriving at the station, guests boarded a large, open-air aerial tram vehicle. There, a live guide aboard the tram informed them that they were being evacuated off the Manhattan Island and over to Roosevelt Island during Kong's attack. The tram radio was tuned into the police emergency frequency, so that guests could be informed of Kong's location in the city. The tram travels high above the streets of downtown New York City, where guests could view Kong's path of destruction. Ahead is a subway train partly derailed from the elevated track. A police chopper describes the scene around the tram over the radio, alerting that Kong was approaching the guests. Suddenly, though not seen, Kong grabs the power pole. It tips over and its electrical transformer explodes, unleashing a shower of sparks and fire, which ignited the derailed elevated subway train. Rounding a bend and nearing the East River, the tram encountered Kong hanging from the Queensboro Bridge. A police helicopter hovering nearby opens fire on Kong to protect the approaching tram. Kong retaliates by pounding the roof of the tram and sending the chopper crashing and exploding into the bridge. Narrowly escaping the attack, the tram finally crossed over to the river of Roosevelt Island. A second helicopter hovering nearby shines a bright searchlight directly at the tram, inhabiting the view of what lays ahead. The tram operator urges the chopper to turn off the light, and in doing so, revealed that Kong had cut off the tram. He proceeds to grab, lift, and furiously drop the tram after being fired upon by the circling police helicopter. Finally, after narrowly escaping the enraged beast for the second time, a small television monitor lowers from the tram's ceiling and guests watch themselves on the ride as part of the breaking news report as the tram safely makes its way to Roosevelt Island. Although Kong was never defeated, the news report says he is making his way away from New York City, elevating the threat, unknown to the true finale ahead. All I can say about this one is, wow, what an experience I'll never forget. If there is one thing other than the 1976 remake I enjoy in the Kong lore, it's this stunning, electrifying thrill ride of a show. I was about 6 years old, and I, like many kids, saw those old ads for Universal Studios Florida back in the 90s. Of course I begged my parents to go there, and so we did. It was something that stays in my brain to this very day. Not only did it spark my imagination in the art of filmmaking, but seeing some of my favorite movies come to life like never before. They were there, they were real, and I was in those movies. And Kongfrontation was no exception. If I could try to fit this into a story, I'd say it takes place during the third act of the 1976 film. Remember in the film when after Kong derails the train and makes his way to the East River? This is sort of what happens during that timeline. While the attraction was based from the film, it was designed by Totally Fun Company. The production began in 1986 during the finishing touches of the King Kong encounter in Hollywood. Steven Spielberg himself at the time was one of the head honchos and was extremely impressed on how the Kong was going along. So much so, he almost hired Bob Gurr to create the animatronic dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. But I'm getting off track. He was also in development in the production of a brand new studio in Orlando, Florida, and eventually, with the success of the encounter, Universal started planning another Kong attraction in the now building Orlando studio. Once again, the craftsmanship and design of New York looked spectacular and improved, and took up a soundstage the size of 2 football fields. Not only that, this time 2 King Kong animatronic figures were built for this attraction, and were scaled to be 39 feet tall, with an arm span of each figure being 54 feet. The one used in the street sequence weighed approximately 1,300 pounds, while a lighter figure that weighed approximately 8,000 pounds was used for the bridge sequence of the ride. The Kongs were built to be both analog and digital, giving them the ability to perform 62 separate functions, and much like its Hollywood brother, a smelling device was constructed to give Kong's figures banana breath, which was emulated during roars at the guests. These 2 pieces were superb to the Hollywood version. This was the Kong I always pictured in my mind. I remember being scared to death of him when he cut us off and lifted us into the air. I was so close to his mouth, I felt like I was gonna get eaten. But once we made our escape, I looked back, realizing he was trying to save us, and I hoped he made it okay. The helicopters that were used in the ride were modeled from actual helicopters and were true to size, which is why they looked as realistic as they did. I had to cover my ears from the gunfire. Kongfrontation has been credited as being the heart for the success of Universal Studios Florida. The attraction was indeed the crown jewel of the Florida park. I think they did more advertising with Kong than any other ride there. While the attraction drew many crowds, it unfortunately had an unreliable track record due to the complex special effects involved. During the mid-90s, Universal engineers attempted several times to improve reliability, which ultimately required removing functionality of the Kong puppets by limiting their movements and some of the background effects. Kongfrontation was, for me, a signature piece of Universal Studios Florida, more than any of the attractions that remain there today, and the idea to close such an attraction struck many fans of the ride being unreal. Despite many protests and complaints from fans, Kongfrontation officially closed on September 8th, 2002. There's never been a solid reason given by Universal for the closure, although it is speculated that maintenance issues, high staffing costs, and the cost of repairs are all the main reasons. Some have even speculated that it was because of 9/11, due to New Yorkers that might find the ride with fire and such being a little offensive. The attraction joined a list of other popular pieces that have since been retired and replaced, including the Ghostbusters Spooktacular, The Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, Back to the Future the Ride, and Jaws. But on a brighter note, this year the 8th Wonder will be returning to Florida with Skull Island Reign of Kong. Needless to say, I'm excited. But if there's one thing I would request is a lot more practical effects, and the ape looking more reminiscent of the old school Kong attraction. Or even better, take a look at this. With Kongfrontation's success at the time, there was a place where guests exited the attraction and traveled down a series of ramps into a King Kong-themed gift shop called Safari Outfitters. There, a photo opportunity booth was located where guests could pose with a life-size King Kong bust, who appeared to grip tourists in front of a Queensboro Bridge backdrop. Rumors were speculated that the bust was left to rot outside the soundstage of Kongfrontation. Well, why not just rebuild it and have a new generation of guests take photos with them? And hey, maybe even next to this guy. And I felt since its closure, the studio has sort of started to fall apart. Nothing here is really Universal licensed anymore. Instead, it's more dominated by Warner Brothers and such. Almost every ride that involved real elements, sets, and props have been disbanded for 3D screens and simulators. The park for me was never a Disneyland or Six Flags. It was a show of entertainment and personally helped educate many people on how movies are made. It's thanks to them that I feel I started making movies. I haven't returned to this place in over 10 years. My last visit was in 2000. At that time, the magic was still here, but you started to feel that its life force was somewhat failing. And since every closure of attractions and shows, it's become something different and lost. Now that I'm here, I think it's time for me to pay my respects to the long gone shows, attractions, and my favorite ride of all time. So long, old friend.
Hello.